Hi, thanks for joining me today. My name is David Peacock, and I'm going to talk about a book I finished. It's called The Conspiratorial Life. It's a biography of Robert Welch. The subtitle is The John Birch Society and the Revolution of the American Conservative Party. This is a biography of Robert Welch. Robert Welch was a co-founder and leader of the John Birch Society. The John Birch Society is a right-wing advocacy group, a right-wing propaganda group, I call it. This is his story. So the book starts off with a biography of him. The overview of the book is that it covers his life. But the John Birch Society was a major part of his life. Once he develops the John Birch Society, it integrates the John Birch Society history into his own history, because that's basically his identity. To quickly go through his origin story, he was born in North Carolina in Chowan County, and his family, they grew cotton, and they were Confederates during the Civil War. He was a prodigy as a child. He was reading at a very early age. He graduated from college at like age 16. He was just a phenomenal reader, and he had a younger brother named James who used to tease him, and they had an adversarial relationship when they were boys. But Robert, though he was really smart, after he went to the Naval Academy, and he had several false starts in life, and he finally ended up in the candy business. Then his brother started a candy business. So Robert's candy business went bankrupt, and then he went to work for his brother named James Welch. They had a candy, which you may have heard of. It's called Sugar Daddy. It's a caramel sucker, the Sugar Daddy. And so they sold that, and it was very successful, still around today. Of course, it's been sold to corporations, but that was a big money maker. Just grew and grew and grew. They were very successful. But Robert Welch was always very conservative, and he was the sales manager for Sugar Daddy. But as he kind of aged out towards his 60s, he got more involved in politics, and he was always a big reader. He had thousands of books in his library. So he started this John Birch Society. Who's John Birch? John Birch was in the Christian ministry, and he went to China, and he knew Chinese, and he had a heroic life. China was turning communist, and at one point he stood up against these armed communist army, and they demanded that he put down his gun, and he refused to do so, so they killed him. They killed John Birch. He became a Christian martyr and for being against communism. So Robert Welch wrote the story and spread the story through his writings. Now, one of the big parts of the John Birch Society is that they sold books and pamphlets. And Robert Welch was a big writer for these pamphlets. But they had their own bookstores. They weren't really published, by a professional, notable publishing company. It was more like self-publishing. But at their height, they had hundreds of bookstores and hundreds of outlets. People would sell these out of their garage. They would have like a bookstore in their garage, and then in their neighborhood, and invite people over. But anyway, so what were some principles of the John Birch Society? They were rabidly anti-communist. Just hated communists. They saw communism everywhere. They had this laser focus, and everything that was bad in the news could be explained by communism. So they liked Joseph McCarthy and his verbal tirades in the Congress about anti-communism. Robert Welch even went so far as to call President Eisenhower a communist. He was convinced that there were communists at the highest levels of government that were planning to overthrow America. It's absolutely crazy. You've got to understand that this is what was going on during that time. Now, one thing I wanted to bring out is that you might think, oh, this is all crazy stuff from the past, but this kind of lying is fundamental to right-wing conspiracies are still done today in our politics. And we see that with these rigged election things and conspiracies that, all types of conspiracies that we've seen recently. This is a right-wing strategy of propaganda. And the thing is that it works. It works. Millions of people believe this stuff. Millions of people vote according to how they believe in these conspiracies. So the relevance of this book and this John Birch Society is very relevant today. For someone like me, I discard this kind of thinking, but I must accept that it is effective and it is valid and it works for these people. That's what made this book interesting. So this book is interesting, but it's not entertaining. Like, I don't like any of this stuff. I don't like any of this stuff. But I read it because I want to educate myself and I want to know what's going on. And rather than just discarding all the thoughts of people I disagree with, I try to examine what they're coming from and what they're saying, because it's effective. I said that, saying it again. Some of the things they believed in was they were for states' rights rather than federal rights. They believed the states should have a lot of power. They wanted low taxes, but they wanted a big military. They wanted the smallest government possible. But if the military wanted something, oh, they can have everything they want. The military gets everything. They love General MacArthur. That's still true today. And in our current political climate, the military gets everything. The American military they get a blank check. They can do whatever they want. They're the favored child. And that is a John Birch Society principle that is still in effect today. The author is Edward Miller. He's an associate teaching professor at Northeastern University. It's a very thorough job, and he goes through everything very well. It's all documented and well done. He doesn't do any real moralizing, and he just presents it to you so that you can make your own decisions. So I imagine somebody who likes the John Birch Society or who is a American conservative today could read this and might even like this book. I could see how both sides would see this as a balanced view of the John Birch Society. He's not harsh on them like I would be if I was the author. But now they claim they were not racist, and their view on blacks was they thought that blacks were doing okay and blacks were getting better. But when Martin Luther King Jr. came along and he had his civil rights movement, they were against Martin Luther King Jr. because of their rabid anti-communist approach to everything in the news. They were against Martin Luther King Jr. because they said he was a communist. They weren't against blacks, but they were against communists, and Martin Luther King Jr. was considered a communist, even though there was absolutely no evidence that Martin Luther King Jr. was a communist. So that's the way they would kind of do things. It's kind of like everything in the news is a lie, and there were all these hidden agendas. If you read something in the news, it wasn't because of what you read. It was a hidden agenda. There was a group that was controlling things. There was always this mysterious group that was controlling things outside of what you thought was happening. And that is still, you see still that in the news today. When they were really popular, it was really damaging if you were called a communist in public, especially if you were a public figure or an actor or anybody was called a communist, which was their main fighting focus, it really could damage people. And that whole thing has kind of died away because of the way communism has changed. But that's one thing that has kind of diminished the public effect of calling somebody a communist. That has diminished. Oh, and Robert Welch and the John Birch Society had a magazine called American Opinion that they sold, and that was very popular. And they would, I've never seen it, but from what I heard, they would kind of like go over the news and then tell you what was really going on. Robert Welch and the John Birch Society had some connection to William F. Buckley. If you don't know who he is, he was an American conservative, and he had a magazine called the National Review. They were friends at first, and then William F. Buckley thought they were too extreme, and he moved away from them. This one more thing I wanted to say. When the Cuban Missile Crisis came along, Russia had put missiles in Cuba directed toward the United States. So President Kennedy said, you know, you got to get these missiles out of here because they're too close to the United States of America. So then President Kennedy planned an invasion of Cuba, which was a failure. And then it was considered that Kennedy was humiliated. This is how they thought about the Cuban Missile Crisis. The John Birch Society, this is what they said, that the whole thing was pre-planned. The missiles were fake. There were never any missiles. Kennedy's invasion failed because it was supposed to fail. Because the people in Kennedy's administration were communists, and they planned for the invasion to fail to make America look bad and the communists to look good. You like, when you think about these ways that they would interpret things, it just like corrodes my mind. It's just like my mind just like, oh boy. But that's the way that they would think. There's an ugliness to the way that they think. People mock them, like Bob Dylan mocked them.